episode, we will be joined by Arash Azizi, who is a historian at the New York University and has also authored a book on General Qasim Suleimani, the Shadow Commander. In this episode, we are going to talk about Iran and how it has historically perceived Afghanistan, as well as how its policy is shaping up to be in the wake of the US withdrawal from Afghanistan.
Thank you, Arash, for joining us on this program, Countdown Afghanistan. My first question to you is that what is the scope of the current Iranian involvement in Afghanistan? There has been some discussion of Iranian governmental contacts with the Taliban. So could you tell me about the context here and what is Tehran's overall view of Afghanistan?
Iran has significant involvement in Afghanistan. In the last few years, as you know, Iran has, for example, helped recruit thousands of Afghan young men, usually some from Iran, but some of those were living in Iran, but also some directly from Afghanistan, to recruit them for its fights in the region. Many of them have fought in Syria, many of them have fought in other parts, and they're part of what is called the Fatimiyun Brigade. So that's one aspect of Iran's involvement in Afghanistan. As it regards to Taliban, Iran has not only started for quite some time to have some sort of a direct negotiation with Taliban. He has had negotiations with Taliban, and in fact Al-Qaeda even for a very long time. But when it comes to Taliban, what is significant is two factors. First of all, is that in the last little while, it has basically backed Taliban as part of what it regards as a sort of a reality and as a solution to the region. So it hosts them officially. It gives them sort of official welcome in Iran when they come. So it doesn't just have relations with them, but it regards them as a very legitimate party to the Afghan conflict. A position that I have to say was also basically taken by the United States, on the process that started under Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad, and Iran uses that a lot. Basically says if the United States recognizes Taliban as a legitimate party, why shouldn't we? This has come to a degree that now the media linked to the IRGC, the main militia behind the Islamic Republic, essentially talks about Taliban as a sort of a legitimate Islamist reaction and resistance to the United States. It's a radical shift from previous years where Taliban was viewed negatively. Taliban, however, of course, is an anti-Shia force that killed many of the Shia in Afghanistan and has also killed Iranian diplomats in 1999. The last thing I would say here is that so Iran not only does this, but in fact, there are credible evidence that shows inside Taliban itself, as sort of a movement that has its divisions, there is a particular faction that is backed by and even controlled to a certain degree by Tehran. Now, in these things, the intelligence affairs are murky and one doesn't always know clearly, but there's no doubt that a section of Taliban are significantly supported, in fact, by Iran and might even be controlled by it.
Right. So from the perspective of those in power in Tehran, is the US withdrawal from Afghanistan a victory or a problem or both?
It's essentially a victory. It is definitely a victory because it is in line with Iran's demand, if you will, or Iran's line. The Islamic Republic basically has tried in the last decade and a half or so to drive out the United States from the region. Now, it's true also that the United States' increasing involvement with the Middle East following 9/11, the attack on Afghanistan in 2001, and the attack on Iraq in 2003. Initially, they really scared the Islamic Republic. They led it to offer unprecedented concessions. But they also, in the long term, since those occupations didn't really go as planned by the US or very well for the US, they were really to Islamic Republic's benefit. It was able to achieve some of its goals, expand its presence. Two of the main rivals of Iran, Taliban and Saddam Hussein's Iraq, were taken out by the Americans. But the longest story short, yes, certainly Iran views it as a victory. since it has demanded this, and it's trying to push for this. And the fact that Americans, both in the public and the governmental level, basically want to get out for a while now. It's been the same. It was same under Obama, same under Trump, and same Biden is just sort of doing it. It was a little different under Trump, but of course Trump himself was also in favor of withdrawal. The last thing I'd say in this regard, though, is that while it is a victory, it is, as you said yourself, it is also a problem in a sense that it is a shift, and shifts are always, of course, a problem in a sense that it's a new reality. After all, Iran has learned how to deal with US in the region, the tit and tat attacks in Iraq and all the rest of it. So it is a problem in a sense that it has to formulate policies for for a new reality.
So in this whole process, what has the Iranian perspective been on the Afghan reconstruction process? Could you tell me a little bit about that? Like, how do they perceive Ashraf Ghani's government?
Iranians don't like independent. And by Iranians, I mean, of course, the regime of Iran, the Islamic Republic. They don't like independent governance in the region who would have, as regards their national interest, good relations with the United States and other countries. In this sense, they don't like Ashraf Ghani and Ashraf Ghani's government because it has tried to be a sovereign, independent Afghan government with links both to the United States and to Iran. Of course, Iran and Afghanistan are important neighbors. They have been throughout history, other than the parts where they've attacked each other. But the fact of the matter is, Iran and Afghanistan are two of the only 7 or 8 countries in the world that have never really been under colonial occupation. They're two sovereign states that have relations dating back decades ago. So regardless of who's in power in both countries, there'll always be a extensive level of ties. And on sort of technocratic practical matters, there's a lot of collaboration going on to fight against the drug effort, for instance, environmental issues over border areas, and of course, millions of Afghan refugees in Iran, and migration between the two countries. So there has always been a lot of contact, if you will. It will never be like Iran with many Arab countries, which it's sort of low level of contacts and hostile ties. But Iran is not very happy with Ashraf Ghani, and as it regards the internal developments in Afghanistan, has had closer ties to Abdullah Abdullah, the other leading political figure in Afghanistan, who was the head of the executive, or sort of alternate president, basically. But Ashraf Ghani, is because of his close ties to the United States and to the West, has not been a favorite of Iranians, which is why part of the reason why they've effectively started back in Taliban, which was supposed to be their mortal aim.
Right. So your new book, Shadow Commander, deals with the legacy of General Qasim Suleimani. Did he also take a great interest in shaping Iranian policy towards Afghanistan?
Qasim Suleimani actually started his foreign diplomatic career, if you will, in regards to Afghanistan. So he was a commander in the war with Iraq. Then he was sort of he became some sort of an anti-drug czar in Iran. He directed efforts to fighting drug routes and drug trading in Iran, and that meant dealing with Afghanistan, which was in the eastern borders. And this was very sensitive years, right? So this is early 90s. Afghanistan goes through developments, like the fall of the communist government in 92, the coming to power of the President Rabbani and the Islamist coalition, and then ultimately the coming to power of Taliban. So Soleimani was intimately involved in these years. In fact, when Kabul was falling to Taliban in 95, Soleimani, was Iran's envoy to coordinate with the Afghan resistance, right, in the Northern Alliance. He meets them in Tajikistan, as I detail in the book. He meets in the Iranian embassy in Tajikistan. He had a very good relation with Ahmad Shah Massoud, the legendary leader of the Afghan Islamist resistance. His son, Ahmad Shah Massoud's son, always has good words to say about Soleimani, including when he died. So yes, he definitely was involved in shaping the legacy of Iran. Now, what would he think about the fact that Iran is like cozying up to Taliban to this degree? I think toward the end of his life, his policy was already getting shaped, so he wouldn't be totally surprised by it. And of course, an important part of the legacy of Soleimani was collaborating with Americans after 9/11 against Taliban and Al Qaeda. So that should be remembered. Soleimani worked very closely with Americans against Taliban, and this collaboration was cut by the Americans, not Iran at that time. So yeah, Soleimani was certainly very involved. Of course, I mentioned the Fatimiyun Brigade in the beginning of our conversation, and that also Soleimani was heavily involved in that. But the current leader of the Quds Force, Soleimani's replacement, Ismail Qaani, has even more extensive ties in Afghanistan. In fact, that has been his main job for a long time.
Right. Given the sectarian history of the Taliban, there have been some reports of some Shia Muslims in Afghanistan arming themselves in sectarian militias to resist the Taliban takeover of the country. The name being cited in the media, Hashd al-Shia, also reminds one of the pro-Iranian Hashd al-Shabi militia in Iraq. So is there a chance that Afghanistan will get further pulled into sectarian conflicts and proxy warfare taking place across the Middle East?
Well, Afghanistan has never pulled out, frankly, of the of the broader sectarianization of politics in the region. But also it has its own internal dynamics that are different from other countries. For example, as you know, ethnic divisions and tribal divisions in Afghanistan are also important. So there is the broad division between, say, Pashtun and Tajiks, and then Uzbeks, which are important. And then there are sort of factions with history in the civil war of Afghanistan. Afghanistan has unfortunately been in wars effectively since 1978. And in fact, even before that there was, but it has been on a sort of a constant level of civil war for almost half a century. So this creates a legacy of war and of factions. Now, as regards to the so-called Hashd Shia, okay, so there are different reports of people all around Afghanistan, men and women, arming themselves to fight against Taliban. Naturally, the honorable people of Afghanistan want to defend the gains that they've had since the overthrow of Taliban in 2001. And there have been many gains. They want to defend, they don't want, many of them don't want Taliban to be back and are happy to fight for this. They want an Afghan sovereign national government. And of course, for the Shia, for the Hazara minority, Taliban is treated as even a existential threat, effectively, a potential genocidal power. So it's natural that they would also arm. And the history of Shias arming to defend themselves goes beyond, is not linked to Iran, really, and the Islamic Republic. Is part of, as I said, all of our Afghanistan grassroots efforts. There are Shia leaders. There are many Shia leaders in Afghanistan. They're not all linked to Islamic Republic. So there is that. The other part is that, does Islamic Republic want to organize a Shia resistance to Taliban? The answer is no. It's very clear that it's not. It says itself that no. In fact, if you look at the IRGC again, analysts that they've published in the last little while, it's really sort of a level of shamelessness, because the same people who love the language of resistance everywhere and who love to say that the Muslims have to take up arms and do this and do that, are basically saying, well, the Shia in Afghanistan, if they want to take up arms and defend themselves, they should do it. Otherwise, they should let us sort of deal with Taliban. That's the line they've been carrying. So they have not been supportive of armed efforts against Taliban. And as I said, they've started portraying Taliban as a legitimate sort of Islamic resistance to Americans. This is a major ideological shift that one can see in the coverage offered by the IRGC outlets.
Right. So my last question to you is that, as a well-known progressive voice from Iran, and as well as a scholar, do you think that there is a realistic possibility of peace and democratic and pro-people outcome to the decades-long conflict in Afghanistan? And what would it take to make that happen?
Well, when you're a progressive in the Middle East, you have to be hopeful. There is, we don't have any other choice. The actual situation, of course, when you look around, doesn't give a lot for us to be hopeful, but one has to be. And Afghanistan is not alone. All over the region, there are very bleak developments, and forces of progress, democracy, are in a minority or under challenged by rulers who are autocratic and corrupt. And so the question is, what should the progressive forces do? Now, as regards to Afghanistan, it's a very difficult condition. Half the country is already under the rule of Taliban. I believe the job of the progressive forces of Afghanistan would be, of course, to first of all defend a republicanism, if you will, an Afghan republic with equal citizenship for everyone. And that would, that would create an independent, sovereign Afghanistan, which has long support across all ethnicities living in Afghanistan, and it has a history, after all. In the long history of a statehood in Afghanistan, I said earlier, Afghanistan is one of the only countries in the world, like 6 or 7 countries in the world, that has a history of a statehood that goes beyond colonialism. It's a country that has never been under direct colonial rule. So I think a major job of the progressive forces would be to defend such a vision for Afghanistan, and of course to link it to social issues that could build support for such a government. And inside Afghanistan has great progressive forces, important feminist voices that are known internationally, important. There's the Solidarity Party of Afghanistan. There are different women and feminist groups all over the country. And I think the job of the international left, whether in the region or in the West and around the world, is to support these voices and to give them political backing, and when possible more, so that they can build the cadre and the vision that is necessary for the future of Afghanistan. But as I said, currently, unfortunately, they're in a very dire state. But if the history of half a century of war proves anything, is that they won't go anywhere either, and they will continue to fight for better Afghanistan on all levels, because there's not always some grand political victory that is important. There are, if you look at reports coming in from Afghanistan, you'll see that there are people on every level trying to rebuild their country, and trying to build independent Afghan institutions, whether it's in cinema, whether it's in sports. As you see, there are Afghan Olympians in Olympics in Tokyo right now, and you see the stories of each of them supported by independent civic Afghan institutions and those who have advocated for them. So I think the job was progressive, whether in Iran or Afghanistan or Pakistan, is to have a long vision. And the last thing I'd say in this regard is that, of course, the question of enmity between the countries in the region is also important. The Pakistani state has had a questionable role in Afghanistan, as is well known in Afghanistan. Same with Iran, that we talked about it. It is the job of the progressives in these 3 countries and others, like Iran, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, and India, of course, to unite to the degree that they can. We can't put all of our differences aside, but we can put a lot of them aside, and help each other, and have a common vision, and have more contact and dialogue at the very least. And I think that's also very important. So if Iran can have a Fatimi brigade in Afghanistan, the progressives in the region can also have links between each other, and more understanding and dialogue with each other.
Thank you so much, Arash, for joining us.